And we're live. Welcome, everyone. So, in this live Q&A, I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently. We are going to be talking about and answering the question, what the hell do I come up with for a project idea? So, this format's going to be a little bit different. Usually with our live Q&As, you ask questions, I answer, and that's that. But I want to start doing more topic-focused live Q&As because I know a lot of you have wanted me to create videos for a while, and a big one is a lot of you are stuck with just being able to build projects. Not really being able to build them, but what do I build that employers are going to care about? So with this format, I'm kind of just going to rant, right? I'm going to think out loud. This is a super structured, but yeah. Let's just dive into it, right? Okay, so feel free to ask questions. I'll kind of stop periodically and we'll go ahead and answer them. But so what do employers really care about? Passion projects, like what are passion projects? We'll definitely dive into that. So two things, maybe three, that I think employers care about. One, that you have a solid grasp of the fundamentals. That's incredibly important. And a lot of people will bring React or bring Redux or bring some complicated framework or library into their project because they think that it's marketable. It makes them marketable. And it does to some extent when you bring the tool in, when you bring the framework in because it's needed. And so a lot of people skip over the fundamentals, and especially when they start having bugs. I see this a lot with React. When you start having bugs, you have no idea why something rendered, or you thought the state was updated when it wasn't just quite yet because you didn't realize updating state was asynchronous. A lot of people don't really understand what's happening, and they're not able to debug their applications because you might not know what asynchronous behavior is. You might not really know what React is doing to update that virtual DOM. Fundamentals are incredibly important, and whether you're backend or front end, you're most likely going to be tested on them for a junior position. Keep that in mind. So then we're kind of left with passion projects. You always hear employers love to talk about passion projects. What the hell are they? Well, I kind of want to break this down a little bit. You don't need to be passionate about software engineering. You don't need to be passionate about becoming a developer. In fact, I think most of the time, especially when you get into the job search, your motivation is going to fall. It can be a little self-defeating. And it's kind of just one of those things where once you finally reach the finish line, everything's going to feel worth it. And until you do, it's okay to feel demotivated. It's okay to build a project and force yourself through it so that you finish it and you put it on your portfolio. But it doesn't mean you have to be passionate about it. And I want to squash this. Everyone says you must be passionate about software engineering. You do not ever have to be passionate about software engineering. I am passionate about a lot of things in life. Software engineering is not one of them. I love it. I love the challenges that come with it. I like the aha moments. I'm not passionate about it. It's a tool to solve problems to me. And so I think it's important to recognize that. So the project that you work on, you don't have to be passionate about that project. But it should be a problem that you are trying to solve, that you want to solve, that you think might be useful to people, right? I think it's incredibly important to eventually get portfolio projects on your page where you don't quite, to get portfolio projects on your page where, I lost my train of thought. I swear a message came through and I completely lost my train of thought, but that's okay. Draco, hey, how's it going? Started my journey and a lot of that decision making was help from you. Just want to say thanks. Well, thanks, Draco. Thanks for just stopping by and saying that. That's cool. Glad it was helpful. So when people ask me what they should build, I think there are two stages of this. One, you build a project that reinforces your skills, and that's the focus, right? That's why sometimes it makes sense to build a portfolio with React, because you are trying to learn React and you don't have to start with anything complicated with React. But you at least get to, separate things into different components and figure out the type of architecture you want to organize your front end app in. You might be able to use state if your portfolio is somewhat complicated. Maybe you have like a filter for your projects that you could utilize state there. But ultimately, like projects like these, where you're kind of just learning whatever you need to reinforce, that's okay. So you get a lot of like tutorial-based projects. And I always say tutorial-based projects are very, very weak. Most employers won't care about them, but if they're all you have, go ahead and put them on your portfolio. But I think it's important to recognize that when you are going through tutorials, when you are learning the fundamentals, the basics, I think it's important to not put so much stress on yourself to coming up with the perfect portfolio project. A project that you are completing does not have to be your portfolio project. You will have many, many, many little projects that are reinforcing the skills that you learn and that you are not going to put on your portfolio. They're not going to be competitive, and that's okay. You need those types of projects. And for example, a lot of people that are learning CSS, highly recommend I think a really cool tool. So it's really helpful to build your own kind of custom CSS little features, little components of the page. But also you can take mockups that exist on the web, and you can find free mockups, you can find paid, it doesn't matter. These aren't going to be what are going to be on your portfolio. You're going to take these Photoshop mockups, these JPEGs, just some screenshot of a website that was already built, already decided, and you are going to translate that into code. That is incredibly helpful for trying to utilize your skills, trying to make CSS do what you want it to do, and try to figure out why it isn't. Because some of these websites, these layouts can be very complicated. And let's face it, a lot of us, we're not good at design. A lot of developers, really good at logic. But ultimately, design is an entirely different field. It's okay to be a little bit design savvy and learn more about UX, but ultimately, you are taking those mockups and translating them are really going to improve your CSS skills. So all these project-based tutorials that you're doing to reinforce what you're learning, that's what they're meant for. It's okay. They don't have to be full projects. They could be small features. You could recreate features. You always hear about like Twitter clones and stuff like that. You don't even have to do a full Twitter clone. You could just recreate the feature you can recreate a Twitter feature, right? You can get a little bit more specific, right? And so these learning projects are incredibly important. Don't ditch them. Use them. They're not going to be strong talking points in the interview, but you definitely want to take advantage of these. 100%. Absolutely 100%. And so that's with learning projects. Now we're going to dive into passion projects. Now, when you start considering portfolio projects, when you want to branch off on your own, which hopefully is sooner than later, and it's okay if you struggle. It's okay if you complete small pieces of the project and need to learn something new to complete further features of that project. That is strong. That is a strong learning path. A lot of people will go through an entire course, several courses, and they won't apply their skills. And that happens over and over, and they feel confident that they just learned and remember really solid principles about web development, and then they forget it. They get frustrated because they can't take those skills and they can't translate them into a project on their own. So what happens with that? Crap, I didn't learn anything. Am I smart enough to do this? Like, why can't I remember this? Why can't I apply it? That's incredibly self-defeating, and it happens to so many people. Apply those skills as soon as possible, whether it is a learning project or a bigger project that eventually you'll complete. And the cool thing is, if it's a bigger portfolio project, you can eventually complete that project. But when you get stuck, when you have to learn technologies that you don't know, that creates targeted learning sessions. That creates you diving into course materials with a purpose, which is going to help you reinforce things a lot more. When you are just blankly trying to learn a course that's laid out and teaching a variety of skills, variety of fundamentals. It can be very hard to remember all of that. You need to apply it. But when you have targeted learning, you are learning something with a purpose. You are thinking about how to solve your problem, how to apply it to your specific project. And the more you think about it more thoroughly, more in depth, that's what's going to reinforce everything that you're learning, right? And so then you can immediately apply that to your project. You can try to apply that and reinforce that. It is so powerful. That type of targeted learning is incredibly powerful once you get the fundamentals under your belt. So now we're going to go ahead and dive into, well, what do I come up with a portfolio project? And I probably should have said this in the beginning. I want to kind of go over some key skills that you're going to be learning for front end, you're going to be learning for back end, that employers are going to care about, that they're going to look for. So let's just catch up a little bit. Balin, welcome. What you just said was the biggest thing that helped me learn with CSS. Yeah, translating the mockups into code. It's really hard. And you know the tricky thing about this as well, a lot of these mockups, they're desktop. There are no mobile versions. So you have to actually think about, okay, what information am I going to cut out? How am I going to change my layout to make it look decent on mobile? That's not an easy thing to do, especially for your first few translations, your mockups. So it's something, when I was struggling with CSS, translating that mockup into code was like one of the key things that helped me finally start, like CSS to finally start clicking in my mind. Taking an existing site and trying to emulate it. And this is all really good stuff. And I want to emphasize, it helps reinforce what you're learning, but it also is not a portfolio project. It's a very, very weak, low value portfolio project. Use it for learning and reinforcing what you're doing. Hey, James, when you get stuck on routes for days and it finally clicks, that stays with you. That's right. That is right. All right, so let's dive into it. What or how do you come up with portfolio projects? I think that's the title of this live stream, isn't it? I have no idea, but we're going to dive into it. Okay, so I wrote tons of notes. They're all scattered, so I'm probably going to skip through most of it because it's going to take too long. So the very first thing, I'll just wing this. The very first thing is you have a history. You came from an old industry, right? What was that industry? Was it retail? Were you a trucker? Were you working in the mills? Medical? Like, what was your old industry? There is not a single person that I have ever met that can tell me with a straight face that there weren't previous issues in their industry that didn't need to be solved. And then when people start thinking about it, eventually they can't tell me with a straight face that technology couldn't have solved any of them. There's a reason why you got into technology. You see how it branches and it solves so many problems in so many different industries. There's a reason that you've been attracted to this profession. What problems exist in your old industry that could be solved through technology? Potentially coding. Maybe coding doesn't solve that problem, and that's okay. You're trying to think of portfolio projects, trying to think of things to code out. And that project that you just identified, that problem, might not be solved through coding. And sometimes you shouldn't force that, right? So think about your old industry. There are so many projects. Like, I can just look back and when you start thinking about like old problems and try to solve it with coding, one thing that helps is getting fundamentals down. It helps to know what code can do, right? It helps to know what types of apps you can build. Getting those fundamentals down can help this process, but also you have to train your mind to identify problems in the world. You, as a software engineer, are a problem solver. Coding is a tool. It is one solution. It is not the only solution, and that's what you truly have to understand. So when you start training your mind to think and identify problems, just going through your day-to-day, maybe you're learning fundamentals and you're like, something pops up. One of the most immediate things that you should do is write that idea down. Write it down. Even take 10, and if no ideas are coming to your head, Take 10 minutes out of the day and just try to come up with ideas. Even if that day you don't really come up with anything, you need to train your mind, excuse me, to start writing this stuff down. You will get better with it. You will get better at identifying problems and coming up with solutions. That's all you're doing. All these projects that you're trying to come up with, they're just solutions for problems you've identified. That's it. They don't have to be perfect. Your idea doesn't need to be unique. And a lot of people are like, that's already been done. That's already been done. First of all, you're not even trying to build a company out of this app. It's okay that you are in a space where that problem has been solved already. Just try to figure out a different way to solve it. Maybe it's not the most efficient way. It's not the best way, but you eventually will start filtering out these solutions that aren't quite the best. You're not going to create a company out of them. Like these solutions, you're going to go through a lot of really bad solutions when you write it down, but you just need to train your mind and do it, right? You'll get better at it. It'll get easier to come up with project ideas. You will get many more each day, and you'll notice that, on the pad that you keep writing down daily, you'll notice those ideas keep growing. Maybe they're really bad, and that's okay. They just like your projects in the beginning, they are going to be really bad. You're going to build tons of really crappy projects that you're going to look back on in 3 months and be like, oh God, I'm not going to show an employer this. That is okay. That's what you're doing with these ideas. All right, let's catch up with chat and we'll keep going. Hey, Ryan, how you doing? Welcome back. Vue.js and React.js are great for responsive web apps, in my opinion. Yep, Vue's easier. If you find yourself really struggling with React, you might even consider Vue initially. But chances are, the thing is, if you're struggling with React, you don't have the fundamentals down either. And we talked about that earlier. But yeah, Vue and React are pretty good frameworks. I mean, Vue, React, and Angular are all good frameworks. They just do different things. When you say learning projects are weak for a portfolio, do you think CRUD is something to show off? Or should you try to focus on something more like solving a problem or an original idea? So we'll talk about how to, like some of the skills that you are going to want to showcase in your projects. We will talk about that in a bit, Balin. But short answer is you're going to do both. I mean, that's like the really short answer. And ultimately, you want to get good at being able to identify problems and create solutions. That's what you want to show off. And if you are aiming for a full stack position, CRUD, yes. If you're aiming for a front end position, no. A lot of people keep saying learn full stack to get a front end position. No, absolutely not. It's a waste of your time, and you could get better at front end. Now, we'll talk about this. I got so many ideas. Like, a lot of people want to create apps, but they just want to become a front end developer. We're going to dive into that. I'm going to tell you how to do it without, learning the entire front end and back end. Because it is better for your apps to be usable, to gain a user base behind them, to solve something and have that social proof to show, I can build things that people care about, that people find value in. It solves their problem. That's powerful. And having a reason of why you built this portfolio project, this passion project, hopefully is a project that solves a problem that you in the world or your industry that it really needed to be solved, and there's a lot of value for solving it, right? We'll dive more into that though. CRUD is used in most apps, so it should certainly be polished and thrown into projects just to cover your bases. Not for front end. For full stack, I would agree. Hey, Connor, how's it going? Do you think projects should be polished to a high standard, almost like a production level? Do you think solving a problem that works is good enough? Well, so you start with solving the problem, right? You solve the problem, you plan it out, you code it, you clean up the code, and then you make it more efficient. So 3 steps, like you code it out, you just get the app working, right? You clean up your code. Oh, my fingers are blocked. And then you make it more efficient as needed. So solve it first. And, you want to make it look presentable. And over time, you might get a little bit more design savvy, get better with CSS, and you can make it look a little bit more presentable because we're all visual creatures. And I do think there is importance, even if you're aiming for back-end positions, to polish up and make something a little bit more pleasing to the eye. But that does those design choices and you making your app look a little bit better. So we're talking about like polishing by design. Lost my train of thought. Yes, it's important to polish it up if you can, even for backend. But also, a lot of people get stuck on polishing up their projects too much. They build 15 iterations of their portfolio because it's not good enough. And a lot of people will basically get into this loop of my project isn't good enough. And that's called perfectionism. And your project should improve based on user feedback. So when I guess you are your own user, but if you are the only person that is constantly giving you feedback to your own project, causing you to reiterate on it over and over and over, you don't really know if that's needed, right? So I think it's incredibly important to recognize that there is something called perfectionism, and it's a flat-out disease that hurts software engineers. Done is definitely better than anything. Done is better than not done. And you can polish up as your skills grow, but you shouldn't spend too much time going back into old projects and really polishing them up. You're going to highlight your top projects. You're probably going to highlight the projects that are a little bit more complex. You're going to highlight the projects that are more recent and represent your skills more as well. So yes, you can go back. But just be careful about that perfectionism. It's a balance you have to find. Hey, Jesse. How you doing? Hey, really hoping this video can help me narrow down what to do for a coding challenge. I hope so, too. We're going to keep going. Welcome, Diamond. Make it work. Make it good. Make it better. I love it. Exactly, Anthony. Do most employers want to see source code or the working product, or just see you speak to it with competence? Both. Often you're going to have recruiters and initial people in the recruitment line looking at your portfolio projects. They're not going to take a deep look into the code. Usually the engineering team will. So both. You want to have the live presentation. You want people to be able to interact with it. And, show them that you care about tons of bugs not existing, right? If your application doesn't even load, if they can't even use main features of your app because they're broken, how much do you really care about the quality of your code? That's what that shows them. And they're going to want to interact with it. But also, engineering team is what's going to dive into the source code for sure. You're welcome, Connor. All right. So we talked about thinking about your old industry and problems that exist. But another really powerful tool is just to understand that you are a user of so many products. Don't sit there and tell me you don't use SaaS products on a daily basis and you want to become a software engineer. You probably have, a good 100 logins into websites. Navigate through some of your favorite apps. What do they do well? How do they solve particular problems? What stacks are they built with? Getting ideas by just navigating different websites and even just a thought of, you know what? I really like this app, but I really wish they had this feature. You can build an entire app based on this feature that hasn't been implemented in your favorite app. You would be surprised at what you could expand that into. And I think a targeted app that targets a very specific solution is going to be more powerful. You are going to understand your users more, and you can expand past that. But I think some people want to kind of just build this generic project that encompasses all of their skills and solves all of these problems. And they just want to launch it just like that, right? They don't want to launch an MVP. Companies get started by launching products that are really scrappy versions. Hopefully they don't have too many bugs. Design is really not kept up with, or not. You don't put a lot of time into the design, but it's functional for what it wants to do. People really need to understand the concept of an MVP. And the reason why, because a lot of people just want to build projects to reinforce their code, but the reason why I want you to think about building a project that actually solves a real problem and gains a user base, because a lot of positions that are open are very product focused. You can get agency work. So maybe we should distinguish between the two, right? Agency work is you're working with clients. You are working with a lot of different frameworks, a lot of different technologies, stacks, and you are adapting. They have a problem that they need solved. They need coded out into a solution. Usually you'll have people on your team that are a little bit more UX and design savvy that will help solidify that problem for them, and then your delivered requirements. But still, like, you're working with clients a little bit more and you're going to be diving more into their problem. But agency work is very different than product work. You're going to be bouncing around based on what the client needs and the best stack for the solution. And that's what you're going to be working on for that client. So if you love learning tons of new frameworks and different languages and you just like bouncing around, you might consider agency work. If you love building out an application and really honing your skills in one specific stack, and potentially even like, would it be cool if I got some users with this app and they could tell me what they want and I could build features on top of that? If you kind of like that side of things, you're probably going to want to dive into product work. And product work is very prevalent. There are a lot of job postings for it, and that's most likely what you're going to get for your first position. And so if you want to be attractive to an employer with product work, you need to show that your final portfolio projects identified the problem and you really took time to care about the solution that you were delivering. You are a problem solver. 100% a problem solver, and you need to train your mind like that. And so when you do start having the mindset of, it'd be really cool if someone used my app, right? Then you get feedback. Then you can iterate. Then you get involved with the agile process of just iterating and quickly iterating and building a new version. And yeah, my old version, I just needed to solve the problem. It wasn't perfect, but this feedback helps it become perfect for my audience. You train your mind to do that, and you're already thinking like a software engineer. You always, hear different software engineer terms like Scrum and Agile and stuff like that. This is how you start implementing this stuff early. This is how you get experience with it. So let me go ahead and catch up a chat and we'll keep going. Oh, cool. Just one. Appreciate that, Connor. I'm glad it was helpful. So what I want you to start doing, right? We talked about identifying problems in your old industry. We talked about exploring different apps and just coming up with solutions. Your solution does not need to be unique. You are not an entrepreneur. You can be. You can go that route. But you just need to train your mind to start identifying problems that exist in the world, identifying really cool ideas and solutions, and even holes in solutions that already exist, and start writing those ideas down daily, right? We talked about all those things. But also, what attracted you to software engineering in the first place? What attracted you to coding? Did you think that it would be really cool if I could build this app? It'd be really cool if I could build a mobile app. It'd be really cool if I could build a website. It'd be really cool if I could build, just a desktop-based app. What kind of applications got you thinking about that? What inspired you to become a developer? What kind of projects inspired you to want to learn how to code to build that kind of stuff? You have to think about that. What inspired you to get into coding? If you can identify that, and if you can think of projects that you're like, there's no way I can build this. This is huge. Like you think about like Twitter, there's a ginormous team that has built Twitter. And keep in mind, like a lot of these apps, sometimes it's just like one, two, few people building this application that becomes this giant application. But if you want to build a social media app and you want to put your spin on it, you don't have to build an entire social media app, but you can maybe build a very specific niche type of social media app that doesn't have all these bells and whistles, but it solves this very particular problem. And even think about these projects that you're like, I just can't build it. I'm not good enough, right? You will get good enough, and it's completely normal, and I encourage it. for you to list some projects that you're like, if I could build it, if I had the skills to build it, I would love to do something like this. That can tailor your learning. We talked about how powerful it is to actually specifically target your learning based on what you're trying to build. It's going to help you reinforce things. It's going to create stronger connections, and it's going to be motivating, more importantly. A lot of people get demotivated when they're trying to become software engineers. A lot of people get demotivated, and sometimes just finding that extra motivation just to get you a little bit further is all you need, right? But it can be very healthy to have these project ideas that eventually you do want to build. You aspire to build, right? I think a lot of us software engineers want to build better and more complex things over time. It's really cool, and it's challenging, and it pushes all the right buttons in us as software engineers. Have those. Just try to come up with a small list of those apps that you would love to build, even if you couldn't build it. So what I'm saying is, don't let your current skill level limit what you're aiming to build. Because if that ultimate app is what you're aiming to build, that can be your motivation. That can be a huge driver. It can target your education. Don't let that be the limiting factor for you. I'm gonna grab some water. So for those that did miss it, I'm going to go into the second half of this. Kind of came up with some ideas on how to come up with project ideas. And I think like the main message I want to tell you, and I'm going to sum it up a little bit. You know what? Let's just give you like a main message. Just because you're not able to come up with project ideas does not mean that you're never going to become or be able to come up with project ideas. It means you have to train your mind to do it. It's just an exercise. It's a muscle, if you will. It's a muscle that you have to build up. It's a skill that you have to build up, and it takes time. Do not expect to just be able to come up with ideas. You have to train your mind to do it. That's like the main message. You have to train your mind to start identifying problems and start identifying solutions. That's incredibly important. Hey, hologram. How's it going? Welcome back. All right, so we talked about how to come up with different ideas, but what's also important is a lot of what you're building, it also needs to reinforce your skills. It also needs to showcase what you're learning. That's incredibly important. So we're going to dive into some of that. So front end and back end. We'll dive down both of those paths, and full stack as well. So with front end, when you're building your smaller projects to reinforce what you're learning, I highly encourage you to get comfortable with HTML and CSS initially. Don't jump into JavaScript right away. When you start jumping into JavaScript, I think people make a mistake of going to the fundamentals too quickly, right? JavaScript is very powerful, and I think I think a lot of people get burned out with JavaScript because there's a lot to learn, right? And I think it's important to get things up on a page and interact with them, right? Learning, I guess we'll start with HTML and CSS, and then we'll jump into JavaScript because I'm getting ahead of myself. When you're learning CSS, it could be very tempting to utilize recent features that have already been built, like CSS Grid, to solve the problem. I highly encourage people to go back in time, which is definitely showing my age. Go back in time and learn how to position things with floats. Learn different types of positioning that developers had to use to get things to where they wanted them to be on the page. Learn the box model. Learn how to manipulate different elements on the page, and learn what CSS can and cannot do. And then realize how frustrating that is. First of all, I think having those fundamentals down, it can help you do sometimes with CSS and a front end position, you're going to have to think outside the box a little bit and go back to the fundamentals and make like one part of this page do something a little bit unique that CSS Grid and Flexbox can't do, right? And so I think it really helps to have those fundamentals down. But more importantly, as you progress as a software engineer, you need to have those fundamentals down and have strong fundamentals, because employers are going to care about them. But you need to know why you're using Flexbox. What does Flexbox actually solve? Why was Grid introduced after Flexbox? What does Grid solve? And I think it's important to start with the fundamentals and progressively move up and learn why these different libraries and frameworks and features keep getting implemented. What problems are they actually solving? That is going to help you have a very thorough understanding of CSS. And when I'm talking about, okay, we're going to position things with floats and figure this thing out, you actually, move away from your course or whatever you're learning and build something very minor on a web page. Just put it up there, interact with it, get a feel for manipulating the web page. That's what's going to inspire a lot of people. That's what's going to pique your interest. I think people need to build stuff, interact with it, see it do its thing that you just try to control it to do, and or see it break and explore why it broke. I think you need to go through that process really early. And when you jump into these tools that make it really, really easy too soon, you skip a lot of the fundamentals. You don't understand why they're implemented. Employers want you to know why these features exist, because you're always going to encounter that problem where you wish you would have known the fundamentals. That's the thing. You can never escape it. A lot of people think, apps are super modern. I'm just going to throw something up with CSS Grid, be done with it. A lot of companies still don't even implement CSS Grid, right? Start with the fundamentals and progressively move up from there. That's HTML and CSS. Yeah, not giving CSS respect and time is a recipe for headaches later on. It really is. I think that's why a lot of frustration builds. People don't take time to really get the fundamentals down. A lot of people are frustrated with CSS, and I get it. I was for 8 months straight. Now, the mistake people make with JavaScript. A lot of people will dive into JavaScript fundamentals too quickly. And maybe this is a hot take, but I don't think you should jump into JavaScript fundamentals too quickly. I think the first time that you use JavaScript, it should be on the front end. It should be interacting with the DOM. It's going to be dirty. It's going to be messy, but you should experience what it's like to manipulate things on the page with JavaScript. You could even, if you wanted to build some filter system and you didn't want it in the URL's parameters, you could even build a mini little variable that held state, an array of filters that people clicked on, and you could display things and, change a div below the filter that would only show projects, and it would filter them based on this array that you're storing in this really, really messy way, right? You could try to start doing a little bit more complicated things by just interacting with the DOM and seeing it get messy. Like I talked about with CSS, going through the history of what CSS can do and progressively learning more convenient features, the same approach should be taken with JavaScript. Learn why it's so messy. Learn why it's so frustrating, why people hate JavaScript. But more importantly, learn what it can do and what it can't. Why are all these libraries being implemented? Why are all these features being implemented? What problems existed? Understand the quirks. Get comfortable with those quirks. And play around with the window. And then, at the back of your mind, you can always remember there's a better way of doing this. But the best thing that I ever did for JavaScript, and I'm telling you, I did this when learning React. It was such a useful tool, but it was with jQuery. I remember learning jQuery, and before I even learned React, I built an entire virtual DOM, not entire, a very basic virtual DOM of what React was doing before I used React. It helped me understand React way more. And I got to give kudos. That idea came from Full Stack Academy. They really know how to teach JavaScript specifically. Well, I don't know their curriculum recently, but 5 years ago they did. And so that was really, really powerful. When I didn't understand what an MVC framework was, I couldn't comprehend how everything was separated. I couldn't visualize it. It didn't make sense to me. It was frustrating. I'm never going to learn an MVC framework. This is when I was learning PHP. I decided to build my own MVC framework. I decided to build a very, very miniature basic version of it. And then I finally understood it. It finally clicked. The power of going back into the fundamentals and building things from scratch is so powerful. It's so powerful in reinforcing and really understanding what's happening under the hood, so to speak, right? Don't shy away from that. Don't just jump into frameworks quickly. Terrell, that's when I first understood how to use JavaScript, interacting with the DOM. And it just clicked after that. Definitely got to crawl before running. I 100% agree. And so the thing is, a lot of courses will focus on fundamentals. This is one thing I do like about Treehouse. It focuses on interacting with the DOM. I think it still does. But I think you need to play with it. I think you need to have those aha moments and get excited about coding. And it doesn't have to be this like perfect polished app. It's just kind of cool to be able to change a color on a page for the first time. It's just kind of cool to be able to do like really miniature stuff. You're like, wow, my code actually did that. I think having those that visual feedback also reinforces not only your motivation and excitement, but your learning as well. You need to have fun with this and just build like really stupid stuff that you're going to scrap. I'm never going to show an employer. No one is going to care about this marquee that like scrolls through the page and then starts disappearing because I have this like empty div that like hides it, and that's so incredibly stupid. It's not valued by anybody, but you can experiment. You can kind of like blow things up and just do really quirky things and ruin it, break your application, fix it again. And I think that process, whatever does finally excite you, like once you find that that's really powerful, that's going to keep you going. But I think that really fast feedback that you get from just building things, even if it's something really simple, is what propels a lot of aspiring developers into learning more and to wanting to learn more, right? So once you interact with the DOM, right, you can build, when you're learning, a lot of your projects that you're learning, I think a landing page is really powerful. It's a really simple front-end application that you can learn. It doesn't even require JavaScript, but get comfortable with the front end. And then you can dive into the power of JavaScript. And don't bring in a framework before any of this, but then you can dive into the fundamentals of JavaScript and understand it as a programming language, which is what it is. Maybe that's a hot take, but I think most developers realize JavaScript is a programming language with all of its quirks, whether you like it or not. And then diving into JavaScript and understanding fundamental programming concepts. This is where you learn fundamental programming concepts. Understanding what variables are, what loops are, and all the different fundamentals of JavaScript specifically, but also generic fundamental or programming fundamentals. And then slowly, progressively learning JavaScript from there. So experiment with it, play around with it. You could do that with the DOM, and then start learning the fundamentals, going back to the fundamentals and learning it as a programming language. And get really comfortable with those concepts. I often say Eloquent JavaScript, completely free. First 6 chapters, make sure you understand them. You can do the challenges in the back of the book. Now, Eloquent JavaScript can be it's a lot of information, and I wouldn't use it as your only learning tool for JavaScript. But to go through, to read the content and then go through the challenges at the bottom, it can be a really cool assessment tool to realize how much JavaScript do I really know? And if you don't understand chapters 1 through 6, go back, learn those concepts. You should not be jumping into a framework like React or even Vue or anything like that until you understand those first 6 chapters of Eloquent JavaScript and you are comfortable with them. You're comfortable with the challenges. You understand the problems. You're able to come up with solutions. Then jump into a framework. And I think it's even helpful. I talked about this idea of building this virtual DOM with jQuery, which I did before I even dove into React. I think it's really cool to just work with vanilla JavaScript and try to build some of the more complicated applications. Try to build your own little state. Try to build your own idea of hooks. I think rebuilding very basic versions of what you're just going to learn or about to learn, it sounds counterintuitive. It sounds like you won't be able to do it, but I think most people find it a lot easier because you're able to strip off all of this complicated stuff and efficiency that React has, just build a really basic version of it. But one more thing, and I think people shy away from this concept a lot, people shy away from asynchronous behavior in JavaScript. It is a very tricky concept. It's tricky to visualize. And I think like understanding blocking and non-blocking code, synchronous and asynchronous behavior, understanding that concept in JavaScript is really powerful. It's very powerful. And so before you even bring React in, experiment with interacting with APIs. On the front end, pull information in from another API. Do something with that information. Display it on the page. Manipulate it, right? So when you're trying to think of project ideas, I want you to get out of the mindset of creating something super unique. There's so much information out there already. A lot of problems have been solved for you or have been identified for you. So if you want to make that process easier for yourself, why not utilize the information that people are publicly offering for free and aggregate that, do something with it, display it in a more meaningful way for people? What if you could connect to two different APIs and combine that information into an application, into something deliverable that people find useful? Start thinking about that. But I think it's really important to attempt to create or attempt to connect to different APIs because it's something people often neglect. And a lot of aspiring developers don't really have a solid understanding of asynchronous behavior. What does it even mean to connect with an API? Why don't I get that data back right away? What do I do if I don't get it back right away, right? A lot of aspiring developers ask this question. And I think you need to make that simple API request and figure out what's going on, right? Simple AJAX request. And promises are another very, very tricky thing. Get comfortable with promises. You did it with an AJAX request, just something really simple. Now create a promise out of it. Promises are really tricky. Promises are very, very tricky. And it took me a while to understand them. And again, I didn't truly understand promises until I had to build my own promise library. It's so weird. I honestly did not, like I could make a promise work, had no idea why it was working. And until I built my own promise library, shout out again to Full Stack for that. I didn't understand it. Promises are just a very hard concept. Asynchronous behavior is a really hard concept to understand. You know? How are there comments from 10 months ago if this is streaming live? There aren't comments from 10 months ago. Which do you prefer, Axios or Fetch? I'm a big fan of Axios, but get comfortable with Fetch first. Axios just cleans it up a little bit. I'm a huge fan. So, next key thing, a lot of front-end developers that want to focus on front-end and they want to get stronger with front-end, they realize to build a more complicated application, usually you need something external. You can do that through connecting with APIs, but ultimately, like I think a lot of front-end developers eventually learn backend because they're like, I want an app that people can use. I'm going to have to store information. I'm going to need authentication, right? I think that's desired with a lot of different applications to make it work. A lot of applications are CRUD apps, right? So you could focus on front-end, and I think people make the mistake of learning backend when they don't have to, when they don't want to, more importantly. If you want to and you want to explore it, by all means, dive into it. That's awesome. But understand, it's going to lengthen your journey of becoming a developer, and it's also going to give you extra skills to be able to showcase, which is really cool, and it's powerful. But if you don't want to learn backend, don't learn backend. But a lot of people want to have authentication, right? A lot of people want to... they want to store information. They want the user to come back and be able to manipulate it, maybe have a profile or something like that. And that's completely reasonable. You don't have to build a backend for that. Technology has come a long way. I highly recommend you look into something like Firestore. Has authentication. I don't know if it's Firestore specifically for the authentication. I think it is. But either way, like you can connect to a third-party hosted database. It's a non-relational database, and we'll get into relational and non-relational. I have so much to vent about with this live stream. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask. We'll periodically stop and answer them. But Firestore is really powerful, right? It allows you to connect to an external database. You don't have to set up routing. You don't have to set up your database. You don't have to set up anything on the back end. You don't need a server running. Well, technically you need a server running, but you don't need to do anything to create that server to run. You don't have any complex logic on the back end. And so connect to Firestore. Look into it. Your React app can connect to Firestore. Any app can connect to Firestore. Or if you want a real-time database, which you most likely don't need, you would probably use it for like a chat app. I forgot what it's called, but anyways, look at Firebase. It's like a suite of tools. You like 99% of the time you can just use Firestore, get away with that. You're going to be fine, but you can connect a backend in that way without building out a backend for your application. You can make your application that you're building way more usable to people by having that third-party hosted database. It's really powerful. And it definitely doesn't take as much time to pick that up and look through the documentation as it does to like set up a backend, learn how to properly route things. And, it deals with a lot of the security issues that you're going to have to deal with sanitizing a lot of data and just making sure people aren't abusing your app and it's not getting spammed and you don't have to check for IPs, any of that, right? They have all that handled for you. And they have very specific instructions that you should follow. It's pretty clean. I've used it before. I like it. I recommend it. And that's for front-end developers that just want a backend. They don't want to learn backend. You're welcome, Tom. I like talking about this kind of stuff. I really do. It's kind of cool to just dedicate a live stream to just vent. This is what I want to do because I don't want something curated. I'm just thinking, like I have this outline that I keep looking at this outline and I'm not... It's so flooded with information, I'm not getting anything from it. But I just like talking out loud and ranting about some of this stuff. Here's a bullet point. All right, so backend. A lot of people that want to learn backend. Node's quirky. You don't have to learn Node. I absolutely love Node. I learned Node because I like having JavaScript be able to do everything I need it to do to build an entire application. Node is incredibly powerful for that. Node is an entrepreneur's dream. Node is really easy for spinning up something. A lot of the frameworks or libraries and frameworks that you're going to be using are very unopinionated. You could just get something up and running. It's a double-edged sword. And so bringing conventions into something like a Node application is also very important if you want to be taken seriously as a software engineer. But you can get a server up and running very quickly with launching a Node server. With backend, if you're trying to build an application with backend, you're going to have to learn routing. You're going to have to learn how to spin up your server. You're going to have to learn routing. You're going to have to learn how to interact with your database and choose a database. And so, with your applications, when you're thinking of projects to build, I would say 99%. I don't think I've ever met anyone in my one-on-ones that was building something that didn't have relational data. A lot of your data relates to each other, right? And so all too often you see a course offer, hey, just jump into Mongo, right? Non-relational database, you don't have to worry about all this junk. It's like you should worry about this junk. You should, before you even build out your backend, you should understand why you're building out a backend. What data are you going to be storing? What data are you going to be manipulating? How does it relate to each other? And very often, people skip that part. And people that want to learn backend, they learn the non-relational way, and they don't take the time to strategize the schema. They don't take the time to strategize how the data is related to each other, right? So I always recommend learning a relational database first. Very, very powerful. You can pick up Postgres, MySQL. There are other options, but learn a relational database first. It's very, very powerful, and it's a useful skill that you're going to most likely be tested on if you're going to be interacting with the database. Now, as a junior developer, very often you're not going to be making changes even to the structure of the database right away, but eventually you will, right? And so a lot of that's going to be code reviewed. So get comfortable with relational databases first. And then if you're like, you know what, okay, I understand this, right? I've even experimented with some custom SQL queries, because like in your projects, a lot of people will pull in an ORM or something that makes it super convenient to, when someone hits this route and they request this data, very simple promise, I execute, I get that data from the database. I don't really know what's going on. I don't know SQL queries. If you are learning backend, if you are applying to backend or full stack positions, you absolutely want to get comfortable with basic SQL commands. A lot of established companies are dealing with big sets of data, and it's more efficient. Efficiency is something you worry about in professional positions. Efficiency is incredibly important. And so you want to build a more efficient SQL query that doesn't hang for long periods of time. So getting comfortable with SQL language is important. Interact with your database in that way. Experiment with it. And then also authentication. Think about ways like, so when I start introducing a lot of this stuff, I'm progressively going from front end to back end, but I want you to really think about, don't force your application to need it. If your application doesn't need any of this, if the features you're building doesn't even utilize a database, don't build it. Think of a new application that will utilize it. Think of an application that will be useful to people that will utilize that. Don't force it into your application. It makes no sense. It creates an awkward conversation. And that's why, a lot of people building their portfolio with React expect that question, why'd you build it with React? Do you understand that React wasn't needed? You really need to understand the tools that you're using. Even if you use it as a learning tool, just say that. Be very specific about it in the conversation, but just understand that, my app really didn't need this. So start thinking about applications that are more complicated that do need these things. And then we're going to jump into authentication. A lot of job listings ask for some sort of backend knowledge. Should we still apply if backend skills are next null? Yeah. I mean, is it a backend position? So I've seen a lot of front-end positions where I think a lot of job postings say it's kind of helpful, right? It's a good bonus. A lot of front-end positions will treat it as a bonus. You absolutely should apply. If you are a strong front-end developer, you absolutely should apply for a front-end position. Even full stack positions that focus on front end, you absolutely should apply. Now, if you're applying to a back end position, you don't know any back end, I think you're wasting your time and their time. So, yeah, I mean, I've talked about the requirements specifically of job postings, but it's a lot of people shy away from applying to jobs like that. If it's a front end position that, even if it listed as like a requirement of back end, I would still apply. If it's a junior position, not like junior in the title, but it's like an entry level position, absolutely, I would. I want to say one more thing to that. Yeah, I don't remember. All right, so last bit about the backend, authentication. Understand in your application if you want to bring it in, if you want users to come back to your application. Because I always talk about these projects, try to think about the problem that it actually solves and what users are going to be doing with your application. How are they going to be interacting? Think about that. And if they're going to be coming back, if they're going to be creating profiles, if they're going to be saving information, you're most likely going to want authentication. Consider JSON Web Token versus session. What are the pros of each? What are the cons of each? And get either one of those down, and then OAuth is a little bit more of a complicated way to authenticate things. Eventually, I think it's really helpful if you're focused on a backend position to create a custom OAuth flow. And I'm not talking about Passport.js or something like that, where it kind of makes that convenient for you. I'm talking about creating from scratch your own custom OAuth flow. It's hard, it's tricky, it doesn't need to be perfect, it can be kind of broken, but being able to have a conversation about how you implemented it and how you screwed it up is really powerful. You're miles ahead of so many aspiring entry-level developers if you can talk about you attempting to create OAuth and you finally got it working, but it's kind of like janky, and that's okay. A lot of OAuth flows are janky, especially with entry-level developers. So, and that's it, right? So we covered front end, we covered back end, and I think it's important to emphasize a few things. coming up with a project is scary. A lot of people make the mistake of looking for other people to recommend them projects. This is incredibly important, so I want you to hear this. One of the best projects that's going to create the most interesting conversation in an interview is a project that you built, that you enjoyed building, and you built with the purpose of helping others. If you have all of those things, that can create a very powerful conversation in the interview, right? As a developer, you are a problem solver. You create solutions. Coding is just a tool. All these frameworks and libraries are just tools. You don't have to bring them in, and you should be that's another important lesson. Don't bring in all these libraries just because people say you're going to be more marketable for it. Start with the fundamentals and progressively move up. You're going to be a much more desired developer when you really understand the fundamentals very well. That's what people look for at that entry-level position. But create a project that you want to build that sounds fun, that tackles problems in your old industry, that you got an idea and you're like, man, I wish Twitter would have implemented this. You know what? Screw it. I'm going to build my own mini thing and I'm going to implement it. I'm going to create an app out of this. Twitter's a huge app, right? So many of their features can create entire apps alone, right? A lot of these larger applications started with like very specific targeted audiences, targeted problems, targeted solutions, and eventually expanded from there. Your project does not need to be perfect, but the biggest mistake people make is they get bored of their project or they feel like it's not challenging enough and they don't finish it. One of the worst habits that you can build as an aspiring developer is to have a graveyard full of projects, to not finish your projects, to not follow through on them. If you want an example of a horrible GitHub profile with so many unfinished projects that are probably throwing red flags up to software engineer managers, look at my GitHub. I'm going to link it for you. github.com/Don the Developer. My GitHub profile is a mess. It is horrible. Okay? That's kind of an old, I still use it, but that's a GitHub profile that I was building up for a long time, full of graveyard projects. An employer looks at that and they're like, wow, what is Don even like? Like, does he even finish any of his projects? Does he just give up on everything? Like, that is a profile. Learn from my mistakes. I never took time to, clean that up. Do not have your GitHub profile looking like that, ever. Finish your projects. Build a little README describing, what those projects were, how to launch them in your own environment, and move on to the next project. Complete your projects. It's incredibly helpful. It'll look a lot better to employers. So that's it. I'm sure I might get comments on the video, but that's pretty much my rant. Does anyone have any questions for me? And if people leave questions as comments going down the road, we can even expand on this a little bit more. I think a lot of people, they hear a lot of advice on how to create projects, and I think it doesn't sink in right away. Like, it was a very hard thing for me to build a skill up for. But I did build it up very early. But I think sometimes people will take an idea that could be good, that could reinforce what they're learning, and they'll just throw it away. That's not good enough. And I think one of the biggest blockers to people saying they don't know what to build is because they're too quick to dismiss that idea. It doesn't have to be the perfect, unique idea. It just needs to be a project that gets you moving. There's a reason why you thought of that project in the first place. Even if it has a little interest, you can explore and play around with the idea and come up with features that or features that eventually make you say, oh, now I can kind of see the purpose of this project. Now that I'm like exploring it a bit more, I've had time to think about it. I've looked at other applications that are similar. I'm like, you know what? If I added these few features on, this would actually make a pretty cool project. I bet you people would use it. And I think sometimes just getting a project up and finished is way better than you just being stuck, not knowing what to build and scrapping all of your ideas because they're not good enough, they're not unique enough. Hey, Akil, any advice on how to make good README files? Yeah, I think it's important to summarize what your project is, but also a lot of people lack README files in their projects, which, use my GitHub profile as an example, because I don't think I have any README files, maybe a few, but it should show how to get that application up and running on someone's environment. So if the employer basically, a lot of your software engineering managers, engineering teams will take a look at your project on GitHub. They'll look at the source code, and then a lot of them will try to get that project up and running on their local machine. If they can't do that based on your instructions in the README, that's a red flag, right? So make sure you have instructions that can get that project up and running on someone else's machine. Really, really important. And that's the basis. You can get more complicated with what you're going to post in the README, but if you have instructions on how to get that project up and running, that's usually what's going to be in a README. If there are like really quirky things about the setup or quirky things about the application that you feel developers should know, you can include those notes. Sometimes you'll get that in like external documentation summarizing some of that, but just get the instructions to get it up and running, and your README is probably going to be more powerful, more competitive than a lot of other READMEs. Most people don't include READMEs in their project. It's a really good question. All right, cool. Well, that's it. That's completely it. We're all done. So, hope you like my rant. If you want me to go into detail about anything else, I'm going to continue doing these probably every Friday. We're going to do some live streams, or a live stream. I'm going to dive into a topic. I like these kind of topics. I want to keep doing this. So if you liked it, please leave a like on the video. It really helps me in the algorithm. It really helps me. And an extra comment below also really helps boost it in the algorithm. But if you want any specific topics with these live streams, just, DM me, leave me a comment on YouTube, whatever way you can reach me. Let me know. I always appreciate the feedback. And yeah, that's it. Hopefully this was helpful, everyone. Just a reminder, again, I want to thank anyone that's become a YouTube member, anything like that. I really appreciate the support. It helps more than you know. So thank you so much I'm going to eventually have a list of all the Patreons and members and stuff like that. And then we are doing a coding challenge, 30-day coding challenge to get you out of tutorial mode. It starts Monday. So you still have a few days to sign up. If you want to sign up, the Discord link is actually going to be in the description of this video. Click it, DM me on Discord, let me know. I'll give you access. And we're going to be starting that very soon. But thank you, everyone that came. Always appreciate catching up with everyone. And I will see you guys later. Good luck on all of your projects and happy coding, everyone. Take care. Okay, there's the button.